Professor Vogel, Dr. Burkhardt, who's also not here, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, and thank you to Sharon and the Konrad Adenauer Institute for the invitation. The topic of this session, or at least the way I've interpreted it, is one that is dear to the heart of Carlos Moedas, the EU Commissioner for Research and Innovation. At the beginning of his term, the Commissioner announced 3 priorities known as the 3 O's: open innovation, open science, and open to the world. Science diplomacy is central to the open to the world priority. It supports and reinforces the EU's engagement with the rest of the world. The recently adopted global strategy for the EU foreign and security policy makes, in fact, explicit reference to science diplomacy in relation to conflict settlement and enhancing resilience in the EU neighborhood. This is another indication that science diplomacy is becoming more and more prominent on the EU agenda. Research has thus become part of a broad coalition of policies from development to health, which will build more resilient societies. But what do we mean by science diplomacy, and how does it relate to the subject of our conference? The most commonly used definition is that of the Royal Society in the UK. It has 3 elements: science in diplomacy, which means informing foreign policy objectives with scientific advice; diplomacy for science, which means facilitating international science cooperation; and science for diplomacy, which means using science cooperation to improve international relations between countries. I expect that the social science and humanities researchers in the audience wish that there was a bit more of the first, informing foreign policy objectives with scientific advice. For the European Commission, the overall idea is to use international cooperation in research and innovation as an instrument of soft power and as a mechanism for improving relations with key countries and regions. Science diplomacy can be a support to the EU efforts in crisis management and peace building. Equally, good international relations facilitate effective cooperation in research and innovation. How does this translate into the EU's research and innovation program and policies? To take the first, science diplomacy means addressing global challenges through sound scientific advice. The EU and the international community face many complex and connected challenges which can only be tackled through sound scientific advice. The Ebola outbreak taught the world the hard way that lives can be lost if the international political and scientific communities are not working closely together. The European Commission therefore established a global research collaboration for infectious disease preparedness, and on the Zika virus, the European Commission mobilized €10 million for urgently needed research. The record influx of more than 1 million migrants and asylum seekers in 2015 has pushed migration to the top of the political agenda in Europe. The EU urgently needs new research derived from insights that can help shape coordinated migration policies and guide legislative measures. New research data is needed that helps to move European countries away from a chiefly reactive attitude to a more anticipatory and better coordinated long-term approach to migration. In the area of climate change, the Commission's goal is to expand beyond climate science for climate diplomacy towards climate science for peace and security. The EU uses research to address the negative aspects of climate change as part of its collective responsibility, not only as an investment in economic leadership. In the framework of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, EU science diplomacy has evolved beyond science for continental strength to science for global hope. To take a specific example of a project close to home, whose relevance should be very clear to us in the light of last week's events, Elbit and the Israeli Ministry of Public Security are participating with researchers from 9 other countries in a 3-year research project on advanced forest fire fighting. And this reminds me of the 2012 conference organized by the Israeli Ministry of Environmental Protection, Climate Change and Forest Fires in the Mediterranean Basin, Management and Risk Reduction, which was part of a network of EU member state ministries. And the conference was held in 2012 at Kibbutz Nir Etzion, not far from the site of the fatal 2010 Carmel fire. Diplomacy for science is about embracing globalization by enhancing research and innovation cooperation. It facilitates international science cooperation in particular by guaranteeing that the conditions for doing science are in place. For example, mobility should be an asset for researchers, not an obstacle. The EU has therefore introduced a scientific visa package to ease the entry of non-European countries coming to Europe for the purpose of scientific research. In the lunch break, I was just talking with Barbara about similar problems that exist in the region that need to be addressed. On the broader level, the EU would like to eventually see the creation of a global research area where researchers and innovators are able to work together smoothly across borders and where researchers, scientific knowledge, and technology circulate as freely as possible. As part of these efforts, the European Commission will be hosting in early 2018 a joint EU-UNESCO Global Science Diplomacy Forum. In the first year of his mandate, Commissioner Moedas announced his ambition to create a common research area for the EU, Latin America, and the Caribbean. This would be one of the building blocks towards the global research area. And of course, closer to home, there is the Forum of Euro-Mediterranean Senior Government Officials, whose purpose is to make recommendations for the joint implementation of research policy priorities, and is an important bi-regional policy dialogue platform which brings together EU member states and all the Mediterranean partner countries. This forum has pointed to the importance of stepping up efforts towards a common Mediterranean research and innovation agenda. The Euromed Forum brings me to the third pillar, science for diplomacy, which for the EU is about building bridges. It has a particular added value in areas of conflict and crisis where science cooperation can help build bridges between people and nations. We have an example in the region that is in fact built on a European model, CERN, which we heard about this morning, which was built in 1954 as a regional research laboratory to increase international cooperation in science. The Sesame facility in Jordan brings together Arab, Israeli, Turkish, Pakistani, and Iranian scientists. It is one of the few international examples of the valuable contribution science diplomacy can provide to confidence building and to track to diplomacy. It can open channels of communication and build trust where few other mechanisms are feasible. Following years of financial and technical support, the EU was granted observer status at Sesame in April 2015. The Commissioner intends to attend the official opening event, which will take place in May 2017. And Israel is, of course, a founding member of Sesame, and the Hebrew University's Professor Eliezer Rabinovich, co-vice president of Sesame Council, has been a tireless promoter of the project. An initiative called PRIMA is under development, stands for Partnership for Research and Innovation in the Mediterranean Area, which will bring together European, Arab, and Israeli research managers in a joint program to work together on two of the major challenges of the Mediterranean, water scarcity and food security. I'm going to skip some stuff, right? No? The EU also promotes science diplomacy as an investment for posterity in what we call the neighborhood, which means the neighboring countries in the south of the Mediterranean and the eastern countries on the east: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. We have recently signed Horizon 2020 association agreements with a number of European neighborhood countries, from Armenia to Tunisia. These agreements bridge divides and lead to new scientific networks. So Israel's no longer the only non-European country associated to the framework program. Since the end of 2015, Tunisia has been associated as well. As the ambassador said earlier, the EU-Israel cooperation through the framework program has been extremely successful. In difficult times in EU-Israel relations, it is our scientific cooperation that has continued to shine. There were indeed some difficult moments during the Horizon 2020 negotiations. The EU was always fully committed to the agreement, and in the end we pulled through, very much thanks to impressive support from Israeli academia. I would also like to recall the visit of Commissioner Moedas to Israel at the beginning of 2016, when he came to launch the 20th anniversary celebrations. This was a very tense moment in our relations, and 2 months earlier, the Minister of Science had cancelled his participation in the annual reception for Horizon 2020 grantees. Nevertheless, the red carpet was rolled out for the Commissioner, who met with high-level officials from President Reuven Rivlin on down, and including the Minister of Science, with whom the Commissioner had a warm and positive meeting. The successful visit underlined the tremendous importance that both sides ascribe to our research and innovation cooperation. As the ambassador said, it is beyond an issue of numbers. The exposure for both of our academia and industry to cutting-edge research, the links to leading institutions and to key actors in the private sector are invaluable contributions to both our research worlds and economies. It is also worth noting that the majority of Israel's bilateral scientific cooperation with the EU member states, in fact, takes place within the EU framework programs. Israel's main partners are Germany, the UK, Spain, Italy, and France. And of course, as I have mentioned, the framework program and its associated forums provide Israel with a platform for discussion with scientists from the region. So far, unfortunately, statistics indicate that there are fewer projects than in the past involving Israeli and Arab researchers. On the other hand, there are a surprising number of projects with Israeli and Turkish scientists at a time when relations between the two countries have not been positive. These are statistics before the latest rapprochement, if we want to call it that. So to conclude, our cooperation provides many opportunities, and all the challenges are, in fact, more opportunities. Thank you.
Alex, thank you very much.